we saw Trump
Yeah.
become elected.
Yeah.
A lot of Muslims, unfortunately, voted for him
Yeah,
in America, thinking that he's going to be the lesser of two evils, and Kamala Harris is going to be worse. And they bought into that. He's going to stop all wars. Do you think that under Trump, that this genocide will stop and they will be in a better place?
Understanding the current political situation is difficult because we've been second guessing what's going to happen for the last 400 days, and I think very few people have actually got it right. But I think the point that that sister makes, if we go back to it, this is more than a president and more than a political party. This is an objective or a national interest of the US. And they don't just abandon their projects because of a new person in the White House. That's, I think, an important principle to establish. Trump, additionally, is a person who doesn't necessarily get controlled by the system in the same way. So I wouldn't necessarily say he's going to do anything to stop the genocide. He may even try and enact more plans. So there's some discussions about annexing parts of the West Bank. That would indicate something could be escalating in the coming days and weeks. So we don't really know. But ultimately, look, Trump was the one who pushed forward the Abraham Accords. So if you remember, he went round to the UAE. He was the one who brokered that. He brokered other normalization agreements during his last tenure. So I wouldn't at all expect Trump to deliver any kind of benefits for this ummah. Ultimately, these politicians are looking after their own interests. And this is a US-Israeli genocide, a US Zionist genocide. To call it just an Israeli genocide is wrong. Because this genocide, I think someone worked out that within 26 days, this Zionist entity would have had no weapons to fight with, no ammunition. So they had been constantly supplied by mainly the US, but Germany, the UK, France, Italy, and a few other countries. But if you take that US support out of this, it would be unsustainable. The amount of money they've given them to prop up their failing economy is huge. You know, I think someone worked out that they got more money per person than any state in the US. Can you believe that? So ultimately, this project serves an interest for capitalism and for the American elite that goes way beyond political parties.
Jazakallah for the presentation. Forgot what I was going to ask. You know, I'm hoping everyone's been following it very closely as well. And, the people in Gaza are very inspirational. How are they so, like, if they did like a bombing in Camden or something, you wouldn't find a lot of brothers literate with hadith, Quranic ayahs, stories. You wouldn't find many people connected to the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How are they so well versed, so natural? They could easily be looked at like scholars in some of our eyes. Whereas if the same was to happen in Camden, you wouldn't see that same reaction. Maybe if you could share some light how they like that, in link to what you were saying, how they are calling for Islamic solution and the part that it's not just about Palestine and this wider project.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point you mentioned, and in fact what I would say is the people of Gaza are exceptional. There's no doubt about it. I even try to narrow it down. I don't say the people of Palestine are exceptional. I'm not saying other people aren't, but the people of Gaza as a unit of 2-something million people are exceptional. Their link to the Quran is almost unknown in terms of this level of huffaz, people who memorize the Quran, their understanding about hadith, understanding of seerah, sunnah. But can I say something? Their scholars understand it theoretically. These guys live it. So when they mention an ayah, they mention it in the breath of facing the struggle. They don't mention it in theory. They don't mention the mujahideen who are fighting. They don't mention these ayat. They're doing it. They're saying it and doing it. While a lot of people, it's a theoretical discussion. This ayah, this is what the Prophet ﷺ faced, this is what the Sahaba faced. They're facing it and showing that commitment to the deen. So they live it, and I think that's an important point. It's not just that they're well versed in it, but their lives are literally completely at one with Islam as a message. So I think that's exceptional about them. One of the reasons is that they, over the last 2 decades, they've actually spent a lot of time in memorizing the Quran, understanding the Quran, seeking Islamic education. So even you'll find many young children, many of the women are memorizers of the Quran there. But yet it's the linkage, it's the fact that they understand how it applies to their life. So someone who is now going to be steadfast and is absolutely happy with, as you say, the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they accept whatever the decree is, they accept the challenges they face. They don't see it as this brother Mahmoud, for example, the one I mentioned so many times. He even tells people outside of Gaza, like Muslims, who say, I wasn't praying, I was feeling weak in the deen because of what's happening. He goes, what are you saying? He goes, if anything, this should make you more convinced. This is part of the struggle of haqq and batil, of truth and, against falsehood. And in fact, they see it as part of the test of life. For them, it confirms it. And you'll see many, many videos that elaborate on this point. In terms of our lives, I think it is a challenge. I think you're right. If we were to face challenges, I think we would find them very difficult. But they have lived a life from over 70 years where they've seen occupation. Many of them are refugees, for example, in Gaza. Many of them have been attacked in Gaza previously. Let's not forget, Gaza was attacked in 2014, attacked in 2019, attacked in many, many other times. I mean, when I say attacked, thousands were murdered. Tens of thousands were wounded. If you know about the Great March of Return, where these are people that walked up to the kind of border of Gaza, and over 3,000 were wounded. Hundreds were murdered. So they have seen sacrifice. So I think that's a point that we have to accept. There's one thing understanding the Quranic texts and ahadith, but then when you live that sacrifice, it creates something different in someone. This is really where you're seeing someone being distinguished, not just because they understand an ayah, they actually live that ayah. I think it's something we have to aspire to. And that's why many people we know, and this brother mentioned it in another video that I didn't manage to subtitle, he says, look how many people have come to Islam from Gaza, as it being like an example. And how many people I've seen, even Muslims, who's told me that they have become more in tune with their deen. They're trying to improve in their following the halal and haram, they're trying to learn Quran, they're trying to improve their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a lesson for us. Are we at that level? Probably not. I would doubt many of the Muslim world are. These 2 million people are putting to shame 2 billion people, if I'm honest with you. But that's because they've absolutely sacrificed everything in this path.
What I understand is Palestine is quite a deep issue for the Muslims. I think we recite in the Quran, we understand in the blessed land, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the Isra wal Mi'raj. But when we compare it to the Arab Spring, the Arab Spring that happened, we saw the Ummah go, they went rioting every day, with massive, the marches and the demonstrations, but we don't see that on this issue. Why is that the case? What's going on there?
I would actually say the reason is in your answer. I think it's because of the Arab Spring. I think that, this is my own judgment, I don't believe that the Muslims in those lands feel they have the confidence and bravery to do that again, because they saw what the outcome was first time round. So if we look at the Arab Spring, if we look at the countries involved in it, Tunis essentially, whatever they got was hijacked and they've gone back to whatever system they want. Libya is in turmoil. Syria is absolutely in turmoil, destroyed. Country is destroyed. The only other similar example to Gaza in the last 20 years, in terms of the level of destruction, is Syria. Egypt, they managed to get rid of Mubarak. They managed to get someone in that they thought would be better, and Sisi came on and proved he was worse than Mubarak. Literally. If you remember, in the days of the original Egyptian revolution, a few hundred people were killed over about 3 weeks. Sisi, in 3 days, killed 1,000 people. He attacked a masjid. Mubarak didn't attack a masjid. He was like, if you think Mubarak was bad, what I will do to you is much worse. So now, if you speak up in Egypt, it's jail or worse. Straightforward. I don't know if people saw some of the early videos that came out of Egypt. One was of a policeman in Alexandria who got up on top of a billboard or something and started shouting the treachery of Sisi and the Egyptian government for not supporting Palestine. What happened with the soldiers? Abdullah Ramadan Ashri, one of them, and the other one, I forget his name at the moment. they were martyred a few months ago when they fought the Zionist forces. And then we had Mohammed Salah before this genocide last year in 2023, when he basically did an attack inside the Zionist entity and killed 3 soldiers. And it was huge news in Egypt. The reality is that people would move in a heartbeat, that's my belief. But when they have seen so much devastation when they moved in the past, they are fearing that action again. Yemen, destroyed again, if you want to put that under the Arab Spring as well. So really, which country has seen any change? We actually have seen no change. In fact, all we've seen is complete destruction. Every country that attempted an Arab Spring is worse than it was before. So now we have civil war in Libya, maybe slightly less now, but it was very bad at one point. Syria was totally destroyed, and we're talking potentially 1 million people killed. So for me personally, it's the reason why they're not moving. Had those actions not taken place earlier, they would have felt the confidence that this is maybe their opportunity. But what they're doing is they're looking back and said, well, we've tried this before. This doesn't work. And there is a fundamental point here. Even if the people went on the streets, and by the way, I've said this myself, why don't the people go on the streets? Because you feel emotional. Like, how are people not challenging this more directly? They cannot do anything without the people of secret power. Because if they don't have the people of power, then they will be crushed. That's simple. It's the facts that we've seen every time. The people of power are the only ones who can guarantee the change of authority. And that's what we're facing in our lands. It's not the lack of people wanting to move. In fact, if you look in Jordan, if you look in Egypt, many people are in jails now. In Jordan, many people have been arrested, by the way. Many people are under this kind of special security measures. You don't even know why they're being arrested. You don't know where they are. And all because they're challenging the complicity of their regimes. In fact, there was a journalist, I forget her name, she was arrested for a year for exposing the trade that was happening between Jordan and the Zionist entity. In Emirates, there was a student who was deported for shouting Free Palestine. By the way, they were deported for shouting Free Palestine, but Zionist soldiers holiday in Dubai. And their pictures are all over the internet. On their same Instagram, they don't even get rid of the pictures. The ones committing war crimes and the ones that are outside Burj Khalifa, next to each other. They don't even care. So if you've got regimes that are willing to stamp out any kind of dissent against them, then naturally people are going to be fearful. But I'm not saying that's an excuse not to speak out. In fact, there was a very powerful imam from Egypt who gave a very interesting message. He said a lot of people say, if the doors of jihad were open, we'd be there. We'd be the first people at the border. He goes, well, don't worry about that. You don't need that. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, أعظم الجهاد كلمة حق عند إمام جائر وسلطان جائر. The best of jihad is a word of truth against a tyrant ruler. Because you don't need to wait for the doors of jihad. Because you've got the best jihad already available to you. So we're not actually saying you should not speak up. But I'm saying the reality of why people are not doing it is fear. It's fear. Fear of their livelihoods, fear of deportation, fear of arrests, fear of death. It is. I'm not going to say it's not. The reality is, it is a challenge that we have to face. Does that mean you do nothing? No. You should be at least do as much as you can. Doesn't mean you're going to be brave enough to go and challenge the king directly. But you can speak to family, you can speak to people that you know, you can speak to the imams and the scholars and the shuyukh and the journalists. You can use social media, you can do things. Because if everyone were to join this, that's how you create momentum. You're not going to create momentum if one person does it. You create momentum when it becomes a call amongst the masses. But this is the challenge we're facing, I believe. There's a brother there. Okay.
Two questions. First one, you mentioned something about the Arabs told the Palestinians to stop. I think you mentioned the reason why. And the second question was, because you mentioned Palestine, like, how are the Palestinians there in terms of Islam? Like, do they know that the solution is Islam and Khilafah, do they prove for it, or are they saying the difference? The reason why I say that is because a lot of countries that I've seen around here, just protests, they kind of like feminist liberals, and it's a bit, you can't tell the Islam from it. It's like it's Palestine. So, I mean, is it saying Palestine or what?
Yeah, I'd say there's not one, kind of description of a Palestinian, but I'd say the identity of the Palestinians in the call is generally Islam. Generally. generally they do not believe in the normalization. They do not believe in the peace treaties. The surveys that have been done, and these are available public surveys, show that the vast majority don't believe in normalization and peace treaties. That's the view of the Palestinians. That is the identity of Palestinians. Essentially, they follow the Islamic faith. Am I saying they're all on the same level? Of course not. There are some who are going to be secular, and they are, unfortunately, with the Palestinian Authority, many of them. So the Palestinian Authority is doing the bidding of the Zionists. They're doing it, they're arresting, they're actually imprisoning Muslims in the West Bank, for example. Gaza, as I mentioned, is unique in the sense that the situation in Gaza is very different from the West Bank. They're almost, I would say, absolutely the vast majority are calling for the real solution. In fact, there was a video I just saw the other day. It was, again, he's in a tent, imagine, and he goes, whatever they say, whatever they do, Khilafah will come back. The Prophet ﷺ gave us the glad tidings. And I'm thinking, subhanAllah, these guys are sitting in a tent in Gaza under genocide, and they're giving the glad tidings of the Khilafah. So the reality is that the Islamic identity is what dominates the people of Palestine. That's clear cut. In terms of the Arabs and stopping, I think you may be referring, is it not supporting them?
I think it's a war.
It's something you mentioned at the beginning.
I think they talked about the general that was.
Oh yeah, so General Omer Hussein backed up. So in 1948, all the Arab armies were under British general. So this Iraqi general, Omar Ali Bakhtar, who's a Kurdish boy, by the way, originally, he took a decision to fight anyway. But when he wanted to go and liberate Haifa, he was instructed by the Iraqi government not to continue. So the Arab women in Palestine used to sing a song. They used to say, Shlono Saleh Zaki, Maku Amr, Maku Amr. What's wrong with you, Saleh Zaki? Saleh Zaki was the minister who told them you're not allowed to fight, or we're not going to supply you with supplies. And then they used to say, what's wrong with you, Saleh Zaki? Why do you not give the order to fight? So the women were saying, come on, he's ready to fight, the army's ready to fight. Why are you not allowing them to fight? Because the political decision is not taken by them. Jordan is not a Jordanian country. Jordan is a Western colony. It just has the name Jordan, it has a flag, has an anthem. But their king has to take orders from a capital city in the West. So does Egypt. The reality is our countries are not liberated. They've just got this fake liberation. They've got a flag, they've got a president or a king, but they don't take a decision based on the interests of Islam or their people. They take an interest based on whatever the West tells them to do and what suits them for their selfish interests. So that's what I meant by the Arab, and that's continued. So it's not that they're the Arab people, we're talking about the Arab regimes. And those Arab regimes have been installed in the Muslim world.
So I think it's very important, the brother was asking, why don't the people do more? Why can't they go out on the streets? And I think linking it to the Arab Spring is very important because the experience of the Arab Spring has really, it was detrimental to the Muslims, I think, generally, because of the result. But there is also another point. I remember talking to some people in Egypt during the time of Morsi's rule. And why did you go out? Why did you do this? And they said, we felt that this was the one opportunity that could actually make a change for us. And if you ask why do they not do it now? They see their Muslim brothers being killed, being massacred. How are they not going out in the streets? How are they not trying to... The problem is they saw by their action the removal of Mubarak. They saw a direct, this action can lead to this. Nobody in the Muslim world right now believes by doing this action we're going to be able to change the situation. The people do not see a direct action to what they're going to do that is going to have a direct reaction. And unfortunately, I think this is the reality. And yes, why, and Omar maybe could give you more examples of this, like when he was in Jordan, when we went out in marches.
Yeah, so I went to see what one of the marches was like in Jordan. I went with my cousin. And, and this discussion needs a lot longer, and we can't have that full discussion here today. But it's not just, we have to make sure that when we're calling for change, we're not just using slogans. There has to be a real understanding of the problems that we're facing in the Muslim world. Nationalism is still a real problem in the Muslim world. People say, the Muslims are fine, they're not nationalistic. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. They have worked hard to keep that concept of nationalism alive. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we had Hasina kicked out in Bangladesh recently. And what we saw, alhamdulillah, was actually the signs of people challenging that notion of nationalism. Because it's not the natural state of a Muslim. The natural state of a Muslim is that your identity is Islamic, is you're a Muslim. So someone from Bangladesh doesn't see themselves very different from someone from Pakistan. But what they've had to say over the last 50 years is, oh my God, you guys are so different. Look at the language difference. Look at the fact what they did, the Pakistani army. Look at this, look at that. And then they keep trying to provoke that nationalistic thinking. But in reality, a Bangladeshi and a Pakistani is going to be way closer than a Bangladeshi with an Indian non-Muslim. But who is the alliances with? With Hasina. She was pretty much being run by the Indians anyway. But the people wanted something else. So people were raising the Pakistani and Bangladeshi flags together. People were like, what's going on here? This has never happened before. I'm not proposing that we raise flags. But the idea was that we don't believe in these divisions. So if we look at that example in Bangladesh, all these years under Hasina's rule, and it looks like nothing's happened. Nothing's happening, nothing's happening. Then they make that mistake with the law change, about giving priority to people and veterans of the Civil War. And what happens? The country goes wild. But they didn't have a previous Bangladeshi spring. So theirs was the first time. When you have a first time, people are willing. And by the way, hundreds of people sacrificed their lives. It's not a joke. We're not saying this came easy. They had to put their children on the line and say, are you going to continue going on the streets? And they did, and until the pressure was too much. But there was a big difference. The army wasn't going to defend Hasina. And when the army said they were not going to support Hasina, she knew her time was up, and she got a helicopter and ran away to India. But until that point, she was going to continue. She didn't mind killing. Like Bashar didn't mind killing. They'll kill. They'll slaughter their own people. For them, you're like just annoying people trying to cause problems for their kingdom. So look at the example of Bangladesh. The reality is it's when the army decides they're going to pull their support from a ruler, that person's gone. So why do people in the Muslim world find it hard, particularly in the Arab world, is because they've seen the failures of their previous attempts. But what we need to do is elevate that thinking. Say to them, no, you can do more. And I just wanted to show you this video. It was a really nice video from that same doctor. Oh no, sorry, put it on mute.
2 مليار مسلم وظيفتهم بس، اللهم انصر اخواننا بغزه، اللهم احميهم، اللهم ثبت اقدامهم. هتقول لي هذا ضعف الايمان وهم بنقدر عليه وفيش باليد حيله وانت عارف الحكومات ومش عارف شو والى اخره من هذا الحجج. انا مش جاي لا اعاتبك ولا احاسبك، الله سبحانه وتعالى هو راح يعاتبك وهو راح يحاسبك، انا جاي انصحك بس. احنا في غزه قدمنا ارواحنا فداء لله عز وجل. والباقي عليك انت. ايا كنت حاكم دولة، عسكري، طبيب، دكتور، مواطن عادي، ايا كنت وايا كانت وظيفتك، نصيحتي لك اخوانك المسلمين في غزة بيموتوا. اسأل نفسك شو قدمت لهم وبس. هتقول لي انا دعيت وهذا ضعف الايمان، انتوا أمة 2 مليار. تخليش أمة العزة والقوة تتحول لأمة وهن وضعف. 2 مليار مسلم بيستعملوا نفس الوسيلة، بيستعملوا أضعف وسيلة في نصرة إخوانهم المسلمين. يا رب.
To be honest, it was one of the absolutely strongest videos. It was on my mind to use it because what this brother says is actually he addresses many issues. One is, and I'll start with the end, we can't just say it's the rulers and the military in this, because that's true, that's the ones who have the capability of not acting. But if we ourselves are not willing to do anything to speak up, then we are being what he said. We're just being the ummah of wahan, fearing death and loving life. That's ultimately what's keeping most people from speaking. And he says something very powerful. Are we just going to rely on dua and the weakest of the... So you know the famous hadith that if you see a munkar, change with your hand, if you cannot, then with your tongue, and if you cannot, then hate it in your heart. Because you're going to just go to the last one first. So I'm going to hate it in my heart. You're not going to attempt to do the other ones. You're not going to think about doing the other ones. I give a lot of credit to our Turkish brothers who went out to those ports and tried to stop those ships with their own hands. You know why? Because they were denying the munkar. They were actively denying the munkar. Yes, the security probably arrested them after and probably beat them and whatever else. But they took it. They took that decision. And the least, if you can't do that, is not to go straight to your hating in the heart. There was another thing. The Prophet ﷺ said, bilisani, but with your tongue, speak out. You might not be able to go there physically to the port and stop the ship, but you can do something, you can speak, you can give a khutbah on it, you can give a talk, you can write a leaflet, you can do social media, you can do something. But immediately we rely on the last one, hate it in your heart, and we make dua. So in Jordan, this was classic. This was like the standard approach. I'm going to make dua, I'm going to hate it in my heart, I'm going to boycott and give charity. The actual solution wasn't being talked about because it suited their reality. That's what we need to challenge.
I think we'll take one more.
Oh, sorry.
The thing you got people boycotting, you got people writing letters to MPs, you got people trying to message celebrities to see if they can get them to speak out, if not boycott them. You got people relying on elections, and it'll happen here. If you had one clear message to say this is what everybody should call for, from people in Bangladesh to Pakistan to the Muslim world to non-Muslims, if we could all call for one thing and you could spell it out for us, what would that message be?
So I would say there's a couple of points I would focus on. I would focus on nationalism as a disease in this ummah. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because it's the main obstacle that's being used to make this an issue that only affects the Palestinian people. In the same way that when the Rohingya Muslims were being slaughtered, what did Hasina do? They said, it's a problem for the Burmese, right? It's not our problem. And they went to Cox's Bazar and they were there as refugees. They weren't even allowed proper entry into the country. Nationalism is the biggest disease. The same thing that allows Sisi to allow an Israeli ship to go through the Suez and supplies them with ammunition is the same thing that let the Rohingya Muslims be slaughtered. Because some people say, well, no, Bangladesh can't do anything for Palestine. Probably right. Militarily, it's miles away and they're probably not in a position to do anything. But the mentality wasn't that they want to do it. Because even when they could have done something against the Burmese to stop them slaughtering the Rohingya Muslims, they weren't doing anything. So nationalism, for me, as a concept, needs to be destroyed. And it needs to be replaced with the correct idea, which is a concept of Islamic unity, and that can only come about with a sincere Islamic leadership. These are the fundamental point. Now people say, how do you achieve that? I would say you need to at least create that vision and objective. If you don't create that vision and objective for people to work towards that, then what they're going to do is continue with these peripheral kind of sideline tasks and actions that don't actually bring about any real change. How will that come about? Of course, several things need to happen, but what can you do in your capability? My point is that if you think about your sphere of influence, try and at least dominate that. Think about your sphere of influence. The fact is, now on social media, you can reach hundreds, thousands, if not millions of people by putting a little bit of focus on that. If you're giving a khutbah, you can address these issues from time to time. If you're giving talks like these, you can address these issues. If you know family, you address it with them. This is not about a high-level concept that never comes into reality. When I was in Jordan, one of my cousins is half Moroccan, and we were talking about Palestine and other things. And then at one point he goes, and if Algeria dares, and I was like, really? Really, you're going to resort to this language? If Algeria does this, and if Morocco does this, and if Pakistan does this, and Bangladesh does this, and if Egypt does this, and Libya, these lands were carved up to divide you. And now you're going to defend them with your life and honor. I mean, something this is completely wrong. And hold tight to the rope of Allah together. So for me, nationalism and sincere leadership, i.e. the leadership is there to implement and serve the Islamic Ummah and the Sharia, i.e. its duty is to implement the Sharia and to look after the interests of the Muslims. If it's doing everything opposite to that, it's looking after their own self-interest, looking after their national borders, whatever the Western plans are, then how are they ever going to change the reality of the Muslim world? Never. But we need to create that and make it normal. But everyone should think how many people they can influence, because ultimately, if we can influence people to join this call, it becomes a momentum. That's my point. I keep going back to that. So when I started social media 14 months ago, I wasn't even that good on it. I started with one post having 4 likes. 4. And I really did wonder, should I do another one? and the next one came up as 9. And then now I've had over 1 million accounts interacted with, something like 100,000 likes, maybe 9,000 followers. But I just kept going at it. The idea is set an objective for yourself and say, I'm going to engage in this. And actually, if you start doing it that way, you can start having an influence around the people that you know.
One question or? No, alright, no, sorry. Inshallah, Jazakallah khair for giving the talk. And inshallah, we'll end with a dua, inshallah.